Okay. I think we're live. We're getting attendees and more people. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Okay, let's start. Let's start today. Good morning, SIGraDi members, SIGraDi community. I'm Marcelo Bernal. I'm the coordinator of the panel session and also vice president of SIGraDi. During the week, we will have 6 panels, 3 of them during the first 2 days of workshops, and 3 of them during the paper presentation days. So we invite you to join us to engage with those interesting and provocative conversations about different and very diverse topics. So today, let me start sharing my screen. Let me start sharing the screen. Okay. Oh, sorry. So today we will start with experimental media and activism. It's a female panel that will discuss the female role in the adoption and implementation of technology in design and interactive media arts. The discussion will be led by Marcela Godoy. I'm very proud of introducing Marcela today. I have known her for many years. She has an extensive career and production of several interesting artifacts. And sorry, there's something happened here in my screen. Give me a second. Okay, there it is. She is going to talk today about as I said, the impact of experimental media and activism in the design practice. She is currently assistant professor of the interactive media art at New York University of Shanghai. She has been using or approaching design from a design thinking perspective, exploring the impact on human behavior and environment of all those technologies and how they are shaping the current culture. So I'm very glad to have Marcela today and her guest. Marcela, please, okay. Let's start.
Thank you so much. And we will start. I need to, okay. I'm gonna introduce everyone, but I have it recorded, so I'm gonna share my screen and start the video. Thank you so much, Marcelo. Welcome to the Roundtable Experimental Media and Activism. In this panel, we will explore how technology can be used to develop a critical perspective on practices and norms of society. In a male-dominated field, we will analyze from a female point of view the use of new digital tools to take actions on cultural and social concerns by proposing experimental approaches and new possibilities for political and social engagement. My name is Marcela Godoy. I'm an assistant art professor of interactive media art at NYU Shanghai. I'm happy to introduce you today Diana Bogosian, an assistant professor of architectural technology at Florida International University. Her academic and professional background extends in the field of architecture, environmental design, computational design, data science, spatial design, and immersive media design. We also have Eunsu Kang, a visiting professor at Carnegie Mellon University. She's an artist, a researcher, and an educator who explores the intersection of art and machine learning, as well as the possibilities of creative AI. And we also have Imi Lee, an associate arts professor of interactive media art at NYU Shanghai. She investigates the potency of art and technology to explore cultural and social conflicts and create a framework for research and analysis of socio-political realities on topics of national identity, race, and power dynamics surrounding communications. And finally, Paloma Gonzalez, who is MIT PhD Design and Computation Group. She's an architect, researcher, scholar, builder, maker, and currently her work fosters high-impact circular economies from bio-based feedstock with rapid scale-up across all sectors and rapid customer adoption revolving around material development, computing, and manufacturing. Thank you for being here. We are going to start with the presentations now. We are going to start with the presentation of Biaina Bogosian. Here it is.
Hello, my name is Biaina Bogosian. I'm an assistant professor of architectural technology and urban environmental sciences at Florida International University and a PhD candidate in media arts at University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. My academic and professional background is in architecture, environmental design, computational design, data science, spatial science, and immersive media design. These have allowed me to move across and connect disciplines in different scales of design. It has also allowed me to understand innovation in design within a broader environmental context and explore data-driven and citizen-centric approaches to improve the built environment. My research focuses on the technical, sociospatial, and political dynamics of working with urban environmental data. I'm interested in how new modes of interacting with urban environmental information can empower us as both the ones causing the pollution and being affected by the pollutants. In this research, I'm inspired by environmental scientists such as Charles David Keeling, whose continuing monitoring of CO2, starting from 1950s, gave birth to the modern environmental movement. I'm also inspired by statisticians such as Edward Tukey, who created a data analysis method called exploratory data analysis, or EDA, which referred to a more critical approach to discovering data patterns with the use of graphical representations. The EDA method advocated for not starting the analysis process with the hypothesis, but allowing the researcher to spend time with the information and begin to form a more spatial understanding of data patterns. My work is also inspired by research in participatory, locative, and immersive media, such as Pokemon Go, that could be used as frameworks for improving citizen engagement in addressing the urgent environmental issues. For the past decade, some of the environmental parameters I have focused on include understanding air, water, light, and sound pollution information. Here you are mainly viewing selected projects on air quality data acquisition and visualization. But no matter what the research question and specific environmental issue, my working methodology entails the following categories. The first one is data acquisition. This step is often the start of most projects, which allows me to check the data availability and identify acquisition methods. Whether I'm able to find data, which sometimes might entail log negotiations with cities and officials, or conduct data collection, there's always a devising process, which allows me to create customized acquisition tools. The second step is going from data to information. I'm not calling this step analysis, as it often requires more steps than simply using standard analysis and correlation tools. Here it is important to understand the end audience of the project and really begin to think about how the acquired data can contribute to questions set up in the beginning. In some projects, the audience is the expert community, for instance, architects and urban designers. And the goal is to create better understanding of, let's say, a site. However, in some cases, it is the environmental scientists, and the goal is to allow them to better understand, let's say, the hardware's functionality. But in most cases, what I find important is to communicate the information with the general public. The third aspect is information visualization. In this process, I often think about short and long-term use of the visualization. I also think about whether it's appropriate to use real-time data or archival data, or both. I also think about what is an appropriate medium for communicating the visualization. Just because I'm able to do the project in augmented reality or virtual reality, it doesn't mean that every project requires this media. It is also important to think about rule of scale and camera angles in each visualization. But one of the main things that I often think about is whether the experience should be narrative-based or should it be open-ended and up to the user. The last component is participatory mechanisms. Here, it's key to identify how a group of users can contribute to any of the steps that I mentioned earlier, and at the same time benefit from the efforts. This process requires thinking about incentivization of the users. Most participatory efforts utilize one of the following categories of incentivization, which are activism, research, monetary gain, or entertainment. So, can we leverage these categories for better understanding of the nuanced nature of environmental data? I believe the answer is yes, but it will also require environmental policy change. So my quest here is to think about how the steps that I mentioned earlier can contribute to both environmental literacy and policy. I have been able to test this in various cities and understand similarities and differences in the process. The truth is that when looking for existing urban environmental data, one truly understands that this process is very political, as it has the constraints of data accessibility issues, with an additional layer of resistance that comes with environmental work. Therefore, opening up the workflows to participatory methods and engaging citizens in the process, and whether this falls under, let's say, the label of citizen science or just simply citizen-centric approaches, is critical.
Hello, this is Eun-Soo Kang. Reflection and imagination of AI. AI that I work with is a machine that learns from a data set collected and labeled by human. The data set mirrors our society, including stereotypes and biases. In 2018, it was revealed that the data set for face detection that major companies had used were white male dominant, more than 75% male and more than 80% white. So this article argues face recognition is only accurate if you are a white guy. I'm an artist and I use publicly available data set from academia. The one I used is CelebA, a collection of celebrity face photos. This data set is not white male dominant, but more white young female faces are in the data set. It has about 75% Caucasian faces and 58% of female faces. One other interesting finding was that there were more smiling faces of women than men, which in my opinion is a bizarrely accurate reflection of our society. I make art with AI, and it sometimes shows AI's imagination beyond the given data set. These are two faces, portraits, from a portrait series called Face Series that I made with MMD-GAN, a machine learning algorithm, in 2017. Mr. and Mrs. GAN and GAN-D both appeared to have gender ambiguity. There were many other portraits generated, and they were also ambiguous in terms of age and ethnicity. I asked people what they saw from the right face, the one on the right. 56 people responded female, 29 people said male, 5 were more for hermaphrodite or androgyne, 1 for transgender, 1 for a Dutch person, 1 for Pokemon, 1 for puppy, and 2 for David Bowie. What I see when working with AI is the accurately biased reflection of us and the imagination or inspiration that we can reflect on. As an exploration of AI imagination, My colleagues, students, and I developed creative machine learning algorithms and made oral fauna. Oral fauna is a group of unknown creatures that is imagined by AI, as well as an interactive installation where people can touch or talk to oral fauna. Oral fauna also performed a duet with a human guitarist, Donald Craig, last year. This is an excerpt from the performance. I see our relationship with AI that is now and what it should be is neighbor. Neither a slave-like tool nor an evil dictator. It would be great if people start building better data sets. While machine learning researchers are working on fairness, and stop making publicity stunts using exaggerated or distorted information about AI and inducing fears to the public. This is me. One last thing I want to mention is that fellow women in the AI art or creative AI field, and I have started a collective together, Women Plus Art AI Collective. It's a collective of women working at the intersection of art and AI. AI is a male-dominant field. There is a report that says only 12% of machine learning researchers are women. We are minorities, and we made this collective to make ourselves a little more visible. This is my 5 minutes. Thank you for listening. See you soon in the discussion.
Hi, my name is Inmi Lee. I am an associate professor at NYU Shanghai in the Interactive Media Arts Department. My work investigates the potency of art and technology to explore cultural and social conflicts and create a framework for research. I'm interested in topics of national identity, race, and power dynamics surrounding communication. In discussing how technological tools are used in art practice to discuss new possibilities for political and social engagement, I'd like to talk about my project titled Mother. In our global society, we all have an experience of learning a new language other than our own mother tongue. There are some interesting cultural issues when we open up the discussion about speaking a foreign language, but there are also important social and political issues that are directly connected to everyday life and experience of many people, which are not recorded because they are stories of an ordinary or marginalized people. Hannah Arendt said, "Speech is what makes man a political being." And Noam Chomsky said, "Questions of language are basically a question of power." So the project Mother attempts to debunk the myth of language based on the linguistic study sound symbolism, which discusses the relationship between shape and sound. The project invites the participants who do not understand Korean. They're given two related Korean automatopoeia words, and were asked to describe the sound solely based on the sound itself. They were also asked to use gestures to describe the sound. The project is asking the participants to make synesthetic connection between sound and gesture. I particularly chose the Korean language due to the fact that it is a phonetic language. So there is a direct connection between sound and the language itself. So I'm going to actually play the video from the project.
Bijuk. This actually sounds to me like those machines that build electronics, and they take the electronics part and they put them into some surface, and they make the sound. Like every time the operator pushes the part in, it says bijuk, bijuk.
A bijuk, to me, the last part sounds more like something that's flying by, like zhoosh, sort of a whoosh sound when something's going by really fast. And B, well, in my language, B is almost the same word as in English for a bee, so it's maybe a bee flying by.
So in Korean automatopoeia, by changing a vowel sound or making the consonant sound stronger, it changes the scale of the sound of the action. So within the process, I wanted to discover if there is a real correlation between shape and sound. The gestures of the participants were captured using Microsoft's Xbox Kinect, and a custom software built using open frameworks by a collaborator, Kyle McDonald, was used to extrude the gestures in a linear fashion and to turn point clouds to a watertight and a printable form. And the verbal and the gestural descriptions were recorded as video, as we've seen, and presented along the sculptures. These are some images of the sculptures which represent the interpretations of the Korean automatopoeia. You can kind of see the fingers in these sculptures if you look at them closely. So the synesthetic connection between sound and gesture removes the social and political aspect of language, leaving sound as a pure form to study, to discover the new meaning within the sound itself. These sculptures display the frozen form of an interpretation of sound by people of various backgrounds and technologies as intermediaries. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paloma Gonzalez Rojas, and I am an MIT PhD in design and computation, where we advance the discipline through the development of new technologies. I'm going to talk about 3 projects. First, my MIT dissertation, Machine Learning Simulation of Pedestrians Exploring the Built Environment. It's a project that I did throughout the last 6 years of my life. And it revolves around finding the right artificial intelligence tools to simulate pedestrians in the built environment. The idea was to understand the effect of architecture in people while they're moving through space. That project is already finalized and had applications mostly for self-driving cars, which was something unexpected, because I developed a method that is able to show intentions of people while they're walking, and that's useful for understanding pedestrians in sidewalks. While I was doing my dissertation at MIT, I couldn't forget about the effect of the global warming, climate change in the environment. So this is why I started working in sustainable material and circular economies, and started to care a lot about the designing for the environment. So during that time, I started a company called the New Materials. And this is the executive team, myself, the CEO, a co-founder, and supervising this development and R&D, and Jose Tomas Dominguez, a mechanical engineer with experience in startups before working at the New Materials. We currently have 2 projects. The first one is Woodpack. It's a biodegradable material for packaging applications. And the idea behind this material was to make a simple matrix material that will not have a negative impact in the environment, especially to decrease plastic pollution in the ocean and in our forests. So Jose Tomas and I developed these materials. It is wood-based and completely degradable in the soil, and it can go through the waste stream where the food goes. So it's completely organic, and it doesn't put the burden of recycling or sorting this packaging, this waste, when it's wasted, into the consumer.
After hearing all your presentation, I would like to have a discussion with you on the topic of this roundtable. I'm going to start with a quote that is from a video artist, Barbara SigDitze, and it says, "Women naturally gather together, develop, nurture, and sustain. It is intrinsic nature of women to be creators and communicators." I noticed that in your work, you are all using technology as a tool to solve problems in our society, convey a political message, or make a commentary on cultural and social conflicts. Why do you think you should do this? And how do you think this manifests in your work?
So I am a 1.5 sort of immigrant in the States, and I think I've personally witnessed how in the center of individual or familiar or economic and social struggles are language. And language is more than just a pure communicational tool, that it actually is a political tool. And also looking particularly at the history of the States, and after the aftermath of Mexican War in 1848, there were a large number of non-English speaking speakers. Statehood was granted to regions only when English speakers outnumbered Spanish speakers. And I feel like it was important to provide a framework for research about stories of people who are marginalized. And I think because I personally experienced it myself, witnessed a lot of lives of people, and as an immigrant myself, especially in the States, I felt like it was important for me to talk about that.
I think at this point, there is no debate about the importance of looking at environmental crisis as an important design imperative. And whether you come from architecture background, urban design, design in general, or just citizens, we are understanding that this is something that we should address. It's very interesting. When I began my focus research over a decade ago, I had to spend half of my presentation convincing people why these were important points to focus on. I had to begin by quoting data from the World Health Organization to data that was more collected and disseminated by researchers. I'm starting to see that more and more, that part of my presentation becomes short and more about kind of stating a fact, and more effort goes into more action-oriented, let's say, conversations or methodologies. And what is also really interesting in this context is to begin to think about why, let's say, media and design is important in this conversation. And what is really interesting is that we as, let's say, species have encoded bias towards things that we need to react right away, right now. There's an emergency right now that we need to respond to. And when that happens, we tend to get our things together and react. However, when we're facing with things that are more, let's say, in near or distant future, we tend to take our time and not respond right away. So what I'm looking at is way that we can begin to shorten this conversation and go from more, let's say, conversations about why we need to do it, more closer to how we need to do this. So going from more, let's say, presenting an issue to more of an action-oriented issues.
Yeah, well, for me, it has been between like personal and professional experience. Coming to MIT, of course, was like eye-opening in every way, but also made me see so much novelty, so many new things, as Marcela mentioned. Sometimes there was little impact in the world, little impact in the people's lives in general. And I started realizing that there is like so much wealth in knowledge, so much wealth in technology that could be of use for so many people, but then it doesn't reach them for many reasons. Sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's status quo, sometimes it's just slow processes that are just part of humanity. And as Jana says, currently we are in an emergency crisis, like the environmental crisis. It's becoming too heavy and too problematic, and we may not have a way to restore the planet and all of these things that are part of climate change. So that made me think of ways of trying to create some impact by capitalizing what's already there, what we already have, instead of just finding the latest, newest technology. And throughout my PhD, I had several opportunities to do the latest, the newest, and also it gets boring, I have to say. Yeah, but for currently, I am focusing in trying to create some impact and hopefully help with the environmental crisis.
My motivation is very personal too, which I think should be considered to be political enough. We talked about, before we started this meeting, when we were having casual conversation, we were talking about how many women feel not qualified in official tables like this, right? And I was saying, seems we are culturally a little brainwashed or told to be that way. So when I was young, when I was living in Korea, I had absolutely no language barrier for sure. However, I always felt this social oppression or cultural oppression about what, as a woman, young woman especially, what I was supposed to say, what I was supposed not to say. And from my talk, you might remember that from the data set, not many people pay attention to it, but that really caught my eyes that more women faces have in the data set have smiles on it. I'm pretty sure that's more of culturally forced face. It's required face for women. So I even remember some people, when I was young in Korea, it changes now a little bit. When I was in Korea, people say it's not polite that women are not, when even women are not smiling or when women are not wearing makeups. So there's definitely the oppression that I was feeling. So from very early time, my interest is always on this minority status and oppression, social cultural oppression, and how our voices can be muted and how we can make ourselves visible by any means. And when I came to the US to study further technologies and so forth, of course, I bumped into this real literal language barrier. And my status as minority became deeper and deeper. And that really gave me very similar feeling that I was feeling, but in more deeper way. So all these minority status we have as women, when I was younger, as a young person even, and as foreigner, Asian in the US, and also art as an artist in this capitalism world. As we economically, we are always in a little lower bound. So this is just really naturally coming to speak my voice. My subject becomes the status of minority and muted voices. And again, in my opinion, naturally, that brought me into this media art and technology area, because it concerns about relationships and communications more than traditional art, as far as I think. I think that's how I came into this field. One thing I actually mentioned, although it's not about this question, that quote, women naturally gather together, develop, nurture, and sustain. I don't think I agree. So I understand she was born in 1953 or something. So I understand what she was thinking at the time, and it was still brave for her to say this, and there were reasons for that. I understand all that, but it's not really natural in my experiences. Again, in my personal experiences, there's a little bit of difference for girls and boys' development, but it's just when they become more social. It's really when everyone becomes adult, there is no difference. And the nurturing and sustaining, and especially nurturing part. I'm a mom, right? And what I learned from the moment I had the baby, moms know nothing. There's nothing like, well, moms knows everything naturally. They know how to take care of babies. They know what to do. There's nothing like that. Moms know nothing. Absolutely. It's just fear and ignorance and just a lot of...
I agree on that. I second that.
Yeah, and like... Yeah, nothing, absolutely nothing. It's just very frightening. And the older generations, like our parents' generation, would say, oh, moms should take care of babies. Dads are not good at it. It's just because you will learn it once you experience, right? It's just because moms were forced to spend more time with the baby. Yeah. So they learn more. We learn more. And if you put dads right next to the baby for the first year, throughout the year, they will be better than moms, for sure. It's just a matter of learning and being educated. So I wanted to mention that quote, while I understand what it means, at this point, I don't agree to it.
Yeah, I just want to mention briefly that I agree on that. Moms know nothing. It doesn't come naturally. I was reading so many blogs and so many crazy stuff in the internet, and that was a way to survive in another country without my family and having my baby. And the thing is that what I realized is that it comes from experience, from learning. Once you take care of the baby, you learn how to take care of the baby.
Yeah.
And my partner, well, he tries really hard to do the same for our daughter. But I think that the difference in general with men is that it's also more difficult for them to postergate themselves for another human being, or even like an animal or anything. So I saw that it was a little harder for him, but he did it. But that's also taught. It's not. It didn't come to me. I was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna do it. It's definitely taught and learned and experiences. So maybe through experience, women have learned this and the value of that. That by nurturing and staying together, we survive. And yeah, and men don't have to do it. I don't know. Maybe they have to now.
Do you think that is our responsibility as women, or maybe as artists, designers, or architects, to address these issues?
So that's definitely not the default that we learn in standard academia. In standard academia, we are taught to ask questions, but then depending on where you end up studying, the country, the society, the thinkers that are surrounding you, definitely that shapes maybe how you think about design or responsibility of a designer. It's been quite interesting that throughout history, there's been this, I'm going to call it activism spikes. We've seen it when there's large crises such as world wars, or let's say we see this interesting part of history in the 60s and 70s where became really important in terms of giving rise to feminist movement or modern environmental movement. And I hope that we are actually seeing another maybe wave of activism that is becoming maybe entangled with every aspect of not only society, but how thinkers and maybe creatives are being developed. So this is not necessary, but certainly we're coming to understand that if the design process and methodology is responding to contemporary questions, then when the contemporary is congested with issues that need to be addressed, then certainly it's very difficult to create this separation. I want to just briefly comment on the previous conversation. And it's really interesting that we talked about nurturing as a component that either is a part of a female operating system, in a sense. Does it come default? And maybe that's more of a projected, term, and maybe it's more about the way that perhaps power could be examined, or women's maybe aspiration to empower. So I think this relationship between power and empowerment is a fascinating one. We know that traditionally women and other marginalized groups have experienced negative effects of hierarchical structures of power, and it's quite interesting that perhaps what we're currently seeing or questioning is more about how we can begin to understand this horizontal system of knowledge transmissions better, and how perhaps women have historically been better at creating knowledge that is more shared endeavor. So perhaps the terms that have been projected on what we do or what we should do are not the right way of framing what we see that we're actually doing, or historically our parents have done, to do something to put out there.
That's really beautifully said. I'm not sure about, we can call it responsibility. Like every human being has responsibility to sustain our world, or maybe it's our instinct to sustain our world and develop our world and improve it. But I can talk about myself. I want to talk about what I think. I want to be heard. I want to share my thoughts and empowerment. Also, I want to talk with other women like this, like whenever there's an occasion like this. So that's what I want to do, actually, sharing my thoughts and making my voice out and hoping for it to be heard. So it sounds very personal, but I think if everyone wants that, then not anymore, right?
Usually work that includes aspect of solving problems, conveying political messages, or making a commentary on cultural and social conflicts, as you are doing, is labeled as activism and placed lower in the hierarchy of artistic practice. And I think Diana mentioned something about that previously, about like trying to convince people why we need to do this. So I want to ask if you have encountered this sort of conflict, what type of strategies you have taken to surpass that?
So that is very interesting. It's an interesting problem at MIT, because what characterizes us is technology and development and engineering and the power of knowledge and innovation. Well, I've been here in the US throughout the political instability that caused the previous president and the current president. And when that happened, when the previous president of the US happened, the message at MIT was focus in the technology, focus in the work, focus on the research, and focus on what we do best. And I think that I have been doing that throughout my career, like focusing in the technology. And because, people say sometimes that technology doesn't have ethics, or it's just a means, and then we can assign some ethics. But for example, when developing a technology to democratize manufacturing, we can give people at least the opportunity to create a business or to do like some economic activities. So there is some hidden message. And I think that is actually a good strategy to do this type of processes. I do think that there is value on visibility and presenting the problem. But I do think that what you, Marcela, said happens is that then those questions get to the bottom of the list of priorities. They just never happens. And people say, yeah, you can request what you need. You can be explicit about it. But then when answering the question, they forget to give you the thing that you actually want, which is like doing things. So I guess that for me is like masking my intentions through technology. Maybe President Rafael Reif wouldn't want that, but anyway, masking my intentions and my interests through technology, through knowledge, through research works. That's what I say.
I just wanted to quickly mention that one thing that often is not talked about in research in general is importance of funding, and whether we're looking at pure academic research or whether we're looking at, let's say, startup ventures, which it's exciting to see how these are merging, funding is often key for beginning to scale up work and research. And it is true that over the years, a lot of intentions had to be hidden under, let's say, maybe secondary and tertiary focus. And within the technology space, often traditionally activism work had to be hidden under maybe technological novelty. So we're creating advancements in this, but like another bonus aspect is that it could actually empower community through A, B, and C, right? Versus why not actually switch that with the right venue, with the right funding, with the right audience? And it's quite interesting how obviously we're seeing, as was mentioned by Paloma, the political effects. So for instance, as soon as President Obama went out of office, which he put a lot of effort into open data movement, then there was obviously this shutdown with Environmental Protection Agency data, but then all the activism work that took place for people to get together and download all the data and share it. So it's quite exciting that I think more and more, let's say, National Science Foundation grants and larger grants are beginning to look for public outreach, and more community-based dissemination as actually an important factor of these grants. Hopefully this would stay on whatever the next political system would be, and this could be more of a global effort, but we cannot do kind of research in vacuum and with no funding, and these things go hand in hand.
I think the thing that I wanted to sort of comment on, and sort of at the same time, like unfortunately I say that I have to agree on, is this having a main sort of intention, and then hiding behind technology and knowledge. And I think also Yanya also mentioned earlier that we end up presenting or making statements about a lot of facts. I think she actually mentioned that earlier, and then she's focusing now more on how to act on it instead of like presenting a lot of facts and stuff like that. I think for me, I actually do the same thing where I actually hide behind knowledge, and instead of talking about, because again, my work is based on personal stories that I've collected from marginalized people. And so they end up being very personal, and they end up become a narrative of some sort, or they're based on stories. But again, I try to look for studies. I start to look for, or a field of study that I could actually fall under, so that I could be qualified to represent these types of ideas. And so these things actually, I've noticed myself doing this over and over and over. And this was years ago, but I went to a conference in Amsterdam. And this was when I was actually talking about digital performance. And this was a conference on migratory aesthetics. So I actually found it very fitting talking about technology, but actually at the same time talking about migration or migratory aesthetics. And when I was talking about the importance of talking about stories of immigrants, one of the panelists talked about, this is in our global society, there's no such a thing as inequality. Everyone speaks more than one language, and everyone speaks with accents of some sort, that it doesn't seem that important to talk about these issues, which sort of baffled me. And the type of conflict that Marcela actually mentioned for me came from ignorance, and how to approach that. I mean, this experience and this confrontation with certain ignorance actually allowed me to think really hard about how I need to do this. And I mean, again, I'm not saying that I was able to find a solution in that sense. I'm still in the process, but I think I definitely I'm still going through the process. And this phase, I would like to say, of sort of masking my own intentions to get funding, or collaborating with computer scientists or scientists to sort of maneuver the system so that I could get to be able to talk about these stories that I think are important, because they're not really recorded because they're not so important. They are not recorded for many different reasons, and therefore I think it would be important for people to be able to talk about these things. So yeah.
This question, I agree that this has happened in the history, and I remember facing this when I was young, but I think it's a little different right now. Actually, there are many examples conveying political messages and accepted into fine art field as master of art, like Jenny Holter's work, like many other works. Like I can think of many contemporary artist works already. And very recently, actually almost people in fine art were saying, you need to have an activism message to be the popular artist at this point. It's not exactly the right expression, but it is true. If you look at big biennales like Venice Biennale or any other situations in modern, before COVID, what was happening in fine art field was that lots of works about minorities, voices of oppressed people, and showing almost directly political agendas were becoming very popular, and they were taking the kind of top portion of the fine art field. So it's been changing for sure. Then recently, I was feeling different kind of conflict. I was noticing different kind of conflict when we are writing research funding proposal or art project proposal, or even like exhibition project proposal. Lots of organizations ask you to be sensitive about gender issues, political issues, minority issues. So you are actually required to add a portion of it, for sure, for research funding. You need to do that. You need to show how it contributes to the society. Then I feel like when people are writing this, although that writer, the author, has not been interested in that issue, they write something appropriate. And when some people make festivals, like in new media art field, I notice in recent few years, they've been doing very good job of inviting people of different colors. Mm-hmm. And I can see that they have poster having everyone's invited people's faces. So you can see how colorful that is. But then I know the organizers are these white males actually behind the scene. And I have this very conflicted feelings. Are they using our status to get the money and get attention? Or should I be happy that even this way, more people of color or from minorities are becoming more visible, at least, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah. I don't know what to think about it. I feel a little disgusted in one side of my mind, and I feel a little happy in the other side of my mind.
I would like to ask you more about technology. And this conference is called Designing Possibilities. And I guess we all agree that technology is allowing us to create new possibilities in design, shaping the future. But a lack of diversity in tech can shape a future that we don't want. For example, AI systems, and Eunsu mentioned this in her presentation. AI systems are many times developed by teams that lack diversity and thus embedded in distorted worldviews and stereotypes that reinforce traditional gender roles. How do you think your work can contribute to counteract bias in technology?
For technology, and especially in artificial intelligence, there is a lot of top-down work that sometimes is not explicit. So maybe it's explicit through these biases that you mentioned, but there are also other top-down like solutions, like heuristics and methods and decisions that deeply rely on who is doing that algorithm, that new process, or that new machine learning process. And when I was studying that, I felt like I was learning the brain of a person, is because that's deeply embedded in the code, even in how people think about these models. And that is good and bad. We have some good progress so far. We use these technologies for several things. And in regard to this bias, there has been researchers and activists that have requested this to change. And I am not sure if it's going to change anytime soon, because it's really hard to be there. It's really hard to go to the class and be with 200 men and then be with 4 other women and in a huge room. And that's very intimidating. It's exhausting. I'm very tired. But also, I think that it might change when people see value gains in changing. So I think that consumer products, for example, have adapted to women, adapted to diversity, adapted to different types of humans that exist in the world, because that was, in my opinion, untapped market. So they were just not selling enough of stuff to these people, and they were not happy. So by making them happy, they get more money. So they get more value. So there is one challenge first in inspiring and motivating, and also encouraging women and other minorities to take the load in their shoulders of facing this process that allows you to do artificial intelligence and being exhausted about having to care about so many other things that are not the technology and are not about learning how to code or how brilliant I am in applying artificial intelligence on something. And there is also the gap in finding value, and maybe someone figures out how to untap this market, and then we get more diversity in artificial intelligence.
Actually, it's very true, not just at MIT, but I'm looking at the report right now. So tenure track faculty at computer science department of top universities around the world by gender. According to that, only 16.1% is female. And there's also many other statistics. For example, in North America, how many female PhDs awarded AI-related degrees? The top number I can see is like 22%. That's in 2019. And I actually heard, although this report doesn't show after 2019, the graph right now I'm looking at, I heard it went down actually recently. Mm-hmm. And before that, it was going up and down, up and down. It was below 15, and 20 to 23 has been the top within last 10 years. And it's lower than 22, 23 right now. So there is definitely the lack of diversity, even looking at these two genders. And if you consider all the status in the whole full spectrum of gender, it's very serious. And when you are developing AI, there is that person, although it's a team working and developing it, what they are thinking is going to be projected into what it is. It just doesn't born like, even when we have a child, they are different from us, but they also share some features from the parents, right? The same thing happens. It's how they think, how they see the world, that's definitely projected onto it. So if the diversity is like that, then it's going to be what's made as AI systems is going to present more, at this point, white male point of view, or at least male point of view about the world, which is not the correct representation of human race or the world.
I think part of what I'm interested in doing is to show data holes and basically issues with not only biases that take into account when we're collecting the data, but also the fact that we actually don't have enough data for a lot of the operations that we kind of take for granted, or the general public thinks it's also granted. I think this is partially due to the fact that certain terms become mainstream and then they become used and overused. So for instance, I think the way that the term big data became mainstream in 2010s was a massive problem. So this was a term that was coined by John Maishi from 1990s, but with a few articles, it became really mainstream in late 2010s. And it kind of created this illusion about the fact that now we're at a point where we have enough data to figure out everything. The problem is the fact that we need to just write better algorithms. And I think this perception was the problem, because for maybe change expectations about deliveries of projects, research was skewed. So I think it's really important to then think about how our work could counteract or complement or comment on how certain terms or certain components become cultural phenomena. I think we're seeing a wave of that currently with the way that maybe the general public is talking about artificial intelligence, and the way that everything is projected on this black box that could solve everything. And I think at the same time also beginning to think about really truly be honest in interdisciplinary collaborations. Currently, let's say the way that architects are learning about artificial intelligence is by an architect interpreting what was said about that and then kind of passing that down, right? And then as designers, we always actually use metaphors and maybe misinformation or misunderstanding as an opportunity to then launch into new research. But when you have too much of that, and then this becomes then commenting on things that are socioeconomic or cultural that then impact what we're doing, I think becomes problematic. So maybe this is more of a maybe call to have more rigorous process of maybe engaging with technology.
So the first thing I do is staying in the field, staying in this AI art and technology field. I'm one of the person who always feel not qualified, not confident. I always think I'm not qualified to be a mom. I'm not qualified to be an artist. I'm not qualified to be an AI researcher. However, I stay here because I think it's important to have one more person like me in the field or in this world, and showing that I'm still here. I think that's important. And another level, of course, trying to find, I'm a little optimistic in terms of AI development. And I really believe in those machine learning researchers working on fairness and many issues. So I want to show how AI can contribute to solve these problems instead of not just projecting, it's projecting these bias problems of the world, but at the same time, it could turn into a solution as a technology. Mm-hmm. And third thing you know already because from my talk is that I created this collective called Women Plus Art AI with people like me and other people, because I just it's not that I know what to do with it, but I think it would be valuable for people in the field to know that each other exists. Like there is a person like me in the field, and there are more people like me. I think that could be a good first step. So those are what I'm doing.
What might be your suggestion for individuals developing their own practices towards inclusivity, authorship, and agency?
I don't know if I can articulate myself without being too poetic, or because I think the thing is, oftentimes I find myself to be torn between feeling like I have this responsibility like a Superman, like I have to save the world, and therefore what I do, basically try to believe what I am doing is important. And I think it's really important to start, or at least like continue to believe what you're doing is really important. And so that's why I said I don't know how I can articulate without sounding too poetic, that I feel like you kind of need to believe that you what you do is important, kind of like feeling like a Superman. So for now I open the conversation with that.
What Amy just said made me think. She mentioned it's very interesting today in our conversation. I'm observing our attitude more. Like she had to say she didn't want it to sound more poetic. It made me think how we were told we are too emotional. It doesn't say anything. It's just like you are saying nothing. And at the same time, if we are just saying the fact, very, very dry fact, then we might hear that. How come you don't have a sense of art when you are a woman and artist and etc. So, well, in any way, we are going to be attacked. So let's accept that. So what I want to say to the next generation or anyone who individuals developing their own practices, just do what you want to do. Then you will see eventually where it fits. And I didn't know what I wanted to talk about when I started my art practice. It took a good 10 years for me to realize that what I really wanted to say. And it took over 2 decades now for me to realize, oh, actually, I've been saying the same thing using all these different media. So you don't need to know what you're doing. You don't need to try to fit in anywhere because you are developing the new field and you are making the future coming. So that's what they need to do, really.
There's 2 things. There's this really great book that I highly recommend everybody to look at called Data Feminism by Catherine Ignacio and Lauren Klein. And one of the aspects that they highlight is the fact that maybe a feminist approach allows one to rethink binaries. And as part of this is beginning to not only, here we're not talking about male to female, but we're also talking about how perhaps this view could allow one to rethink the relationship between nature and culture, as well as subject and object, and maybe reason and emotion. And I thought it was very interesting the way that you did this observation of do we want to sound, more of maybe a corporate presentation versus poetic, and maybe how we're told to maybe one over the other. So perhaps that's one thing that maybe we could actually nurture more a little bit, going back to the term nurture within ourselves. But the other thing is, it goes back to the important comment that you made about the required diversity and inclusion or approach to sustainability, documents that are currently becoming necessary, not only for grants, but also for academic positions, and the type of positions that are opening that seems to only focus on that, and perhaps how that might skew research in the other way. Maybe one thing that's really important is to really think about how your work could affect short-term and long-term, because hopefully we all want to build on research and dedicate, let's say, build a career based on perhaps robust research. So really starting to think about how, going back to Paloma's comment, how this is not just another trend or fad, but you can truly stay honest to what is important to you and the why question, which is what, Marcela, you began with.
Thank you so much for participating. I think it's very important what you are doing, but also having these opportunities to show what women are doing in technology, and also raising their voices, making it more visible. Usually this field is male dominated, so I really wanted to have this roundtable only of women, and I think it was great.
Okay, so now we have the Q&A session, and there is one question from Daniel Matthews. Which are the keys and main aspects that you think that AI can have a positive impact in society? And do you think that the positive impacts can be general in all the world, or they can be different according with different regions and cultures?
Maybe I could get started. So I think it's a really interesting question, because we are, I think everybody here is aware of, let's say, UN Sustainable Development points, right? So there's definitely, this is something that we need to do, I think, top down and bottom up. And in my case, I am mainly focusing on environmental issues, but I think here we're talking about action items and policies and call to actions. And I think pretty much everybody on this panel today is trying their best to begin to maneuver around and within constraints. But as it was discussed on the panel, that on its own is not sufficient. So I think the balance of top down and bottom up is really important in this conversation. So in this case, identifying, going back to the term design imperatives, which is something that we've been hearing actually quite a lot in recent conferences such as CAD Futures and Acadia that recently finished, is really important. So really thinking about not only immediate issues, but also imminent issues. So the short-term and long-term, let's say, initiatives that one sets up. And then at the same time, I think panels that were, the presentations today were quite personal, and going back to the conversation about binary, it doesn't need to be one or the other, but perhaps finding more of a nuanced conversation is the way to go. Thanks.
So the positive impact in society. The first, before can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. Before I talk about what we can do with the technology, right now, even right now, I want to share my experience that you know, when you have a child, you realize, you realize that how you talk. You didn't realize how you speak before, but at some point you learned, you hear what your child say, how you respond, and like, oh, do I talk like that? And you realize, okay, I should change that. That doesn't sound good. Similar thing happens while I'm studying machine learning and working with machine learning. Trying to make artwork with that, I keep learning, oh, so there are these kind of biases human has carried, and that's too obvious right now because it's copied into AI. Just like looking at your child speaking in this bad way you might speak to your child. So that's the first thing I want to say. Although lots of people don't realize that, I think that's one very positive impact that we are having while studying and trying to work with AI. At the same time, there could be really bright future in terms of making artwork on top of many other things. Like they can help people move around, disabled people move around, and etc. Also, they can help people investigate areas that's too dangerous for people. I imagine something like this, like a blind person using his or her voice and gesture, making an artwork and being assisted by an AI system. And a person who don't have both arms, making a very traditional looking painting using assistive robot arms that is a part of an AI system. So all these things that can happen with the AI system, there is really endless possibility. But I really like the second question about if it's going to be the same in the whole world. No, not really. Just like internet, it is not accessible to everyone. Even the computer during the pandemic, my child had no problem studying at home because he has his own iPad. We have fast internet. I was helping him to study, but not every child had that opportunity. Many child didn't have electricity, and they just didn't have any way to study for the whole year. This kind of difference exists in the world, and that's something we really think about how we are going to solve together.
I think we have another question. I'm going to let Pablo Herrera to talk. Pablo?
You're muted, Pablo.
Yeah. No, I don't think he's there. Okay. So.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
First of all, thank you for this panel. It's more like a comment rather than a question. I've been also exploring in my own everyday work applications of artificial intelligence in building performance. But for me, what is my takeaway from your presentation is this. We have been testing, recognizing this is a wall, this is not a wall, right? Paloma is working, I've been working in that area. This is a window, it's not a window. Or you have a data set. There is a correlation between the size and the glazing specification and the daylight performance. There is a trade-off between view, energy, and daylight. You can see all those stuff in the data and then use that data to predict performance without running the simulation. Okay, so, but for me, what is shocking, and I need to think about that, and I need to say thank you, is this is a stereotype. This is not a stereotype. It's a totally different game because recognizing a wall in a data set or a car is quite challenging. I mean, you have been there. I mean, it takes a while, right? But recognizing a stereotype, I have no idea how to handle that yet. But I think it's for me, it's my major takeaway from this presentation. So thank you for that.
Does anyone want to say something? I would like to ask something more general, not like so focused to AI, because here we have people that do more than AI thing. I would like to ask, like, how are you reclaiming female voices and empowering women or underrepresented cultures in the development or the use of future technologies?
I can start with that. Well, because my focus right now in the MIT Climate and Sustainability Consortium is fostering sustainability with technology around the world. Currently, I am focusing in finding foundations or other NGOs in Latin America, specifically, that I can support and sponsor through the consortium in order for them to develop the technology. But the foundations that I am selecting are specifically led by women. And I am making that very, very explicit because in a very fast scan of the NGOs that exist, for example, in Chile, most of the NGOs that are led by men have much more resources, much more impact, and then the ones that are currently led by women have lower impact, and I want to change that. So that's something that I want to do, and specifically one for developing robots for sorting waste. Is related to what Marcelo said, that these robots will have to be able to identify different types of waste to sort it. For example, bottles, plastic bottles, or through computer vision, through AI. But I want females to be leading this change.
Maybe I can follow up. Thank you, Paloma, very inspiring. And thank you also, Marcela, for putting this panel together. And thank you for the organizers for opening the panels with this. I think that's a very strong statement. So in a sense, I also want to build on this, that I think with most of us, there could be two branches of action. One would be similar to what's been done, I think, perhaps due to the pandemic in the past 2 years with the conferences. And we just wrapped up Arcadia, and it's been really exciting to see not only how by changing to the online format, the female participation has increased, but also by actively having people on the board that are maybe the non-typical organizers. It's been quite incredible in opening up to other parts of the world. So that's been an ongoing endeavor this year by being active in multiple conferences this year, and making that not solely based on gender, but also just based on agenda. And I think also in the work that's very much environmental driven, environmental justice is a very big component of that. And environmental justice by default is bound based on the decisions and hierarchical impositions that's been placed on populations based on marginalization. I am currently in Miami, where redlining was an accessibility to beach, and zoning was a very big issue. I think most of us are very familiar with these type of segregations and how then that causes this ripple effect, which then builds on. So beginning to really think about how we begin to look at more marginalized populations, whether they identify as male or female. I think that's an important thing to put forward. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Someone else who would like to answer the question?
I should have said thank you also. Viana said it first. On behalf, yes, thank you, Marcela, for organizing this panel, and also not focusing only in like the technology or the work that we have done, but also discussing how the experience of being females in this space has been. And also thank you to SIGraDi, to Marcelo and Paula, and these conferences.
And Fred, our Brazilian chair. Yeah, I mean, I think inclusion, diversity is a wider topic. I mean, in my experience, when you have a diverse team, it's easier to connect with people. It's easier to represent the motivations of the other in front of you, your client, your colleagues, your team, because maybe I'm not the right person to talk to that group, but my team member can do that. Why? Because they speak that particular language, they know each other, they share some cultural connection, and they can establish a communication. So it's a more, let's say, complex organization. It's not just one person, it's a team. It's a conversation between groups. So the more diverse you are, the more open you are to understand each other. And actually, it's good for business as well. I mean, because when you connect, you can, make business with people. You can sell something, you can buy something, you can get a discount. You can put together some funding to go for a project. So there is many things that can be done, empower people, right? Because when you separate them, what happened is you're kind of, melting or diminishing the ability of groups to get connected. So I've been a very inspiring panel, a great opening for the conference. The video will be available online during the week. So I also want to invite all our guests today to join us. We have a very intense 2 days of workshop. We have 13 workshops running right now. It's a total success, 29 instructors from all over the world, 138 participants. So we have 6 panels, 31 panelists. So we have a lot of activities, 5 keynotes, right? 119 articles in different presentations, in different sessions. So it's a very intense, I mean, SIGraDi numbers have been so far very successful because even though this is the second year we meet online, we have a massive, community doing many things. So thank to all our SIGraDi members to make this happen. Okay, so see you around.
Yeah, before we wrap it up, I would like to say thank to all the panelists today. Also, thank you to SIGraDi, because I convinced Paloma saying like men are usually louder on showing their projects and we are quiet, and sometimes we don't see what women are doing, and it's pretty fascinating, as you can see. So it's pretty important to open opportunities to exhibit women's work and raise their voices, and SIGraDi is doing this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
go
you.
For the workshop.
Good job.
4 p.m. Eastern time, next panel.
Bye, everyone.
See you there.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.